You guys can, go ahead and turn in your Bibles to Luke chapter 10. A couple things by way of intro here. This presentation is actually, I got from my dad. Okay, so my dad, and I've made some modifications to it, but it is almost all my dad's, and he is substantially more the history buff than I am. He remembers, well, you guys know my dad. He remembers everything and can basically run any direction off of almost any point. So I'm going to do my best tonight, but some of this, the in-depth stuff, if you have questions, comments, I'll do my best, but I can't promise you that I will do as well as if this was my pops here. Freedom, liberty has always, though, been something that has burned inside of me. I think back from when I was a kid, and my favorite book was actually called Patrick Henry, Firebrand of the Revolution. And actually, it's still one of my favorite books to this day. Lena bought it for me for Christmas a few years ago, and I reread it. I was like, that's a good book. But, the give me liberty or give me death, like willingness to die for freedom. That's just always been something that's burned inside of my heart. And of course, we understand that ultimately spiritual freedom is the real freedom. But the principles of liberty are the same. The price of liberty really is the same. And so I think there's a lot that we can learn from this tonight and apply in the spiritual realm as well. Matter of fact, we're primarily going to be talking about the spiritual foundation. So you guys think with me, when was the Declaration of Independence? What year? Sue, I got to learn Kahoot. Thank you, by the way, last week for doing a great job. I was watching online, and I thought, this is interesting. He picks Asa, who at the very end of his life, where did Asa go wrong? I'm totally digressing from this for a second. Back to Sue's lesson last week. But where did Asa, at the end of his life, there's a couple big things that he mentioned, but that the scripture mentions. But one of them in particular, where did he get diseased? In his feet. And who did he consult? The physicians instead of the Lord. Just for the record, guys, I consulted the Lord and the physicians, okay? So I just wanted to, in case any of you. So it was a great lesson, though, on that. I appreciate you jumping in there. And I do got to learn Kahoot, though, because you have a lot of fun with that. So 1776 is the Declaration of Independence. And we think about, what did those guys pledge? Their lives? Their fortunes, and their sacred honor, right? They were willing to lay that on the line for freedom. But when we think about Thanksgiving, we aren't talking about 1776, are we? We got to go back a ways. Approximately what year? Anybody remember? 1620. Wow, good. We got some history people in here. So we got to go back 150 years before the Declaration of Independence to get some of the foundational stuff where we celebrate Thanksgiving because of these principles of liberty that were laid down there. And actually, guys, we got to go back further than that. We got to go back at least another 150 years, a little more than that, to really get the foundation that led to 1620, that then later led to 1776. So there is a flow to history. Don't ever kid yourself about that. And people are trying to cut us off from real history. There's revisionist history, because if people can get cut off from history, then, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. So here we go. All right. Intro, be thankful. I'm not going to, for the sake of time, read this, but you guys remember the 10 lepers, right? Jesus heals the 10 lepers in Luke chapter 17. And how many of them, well, there was one standout healed leper. Why was he standout? Because he came back and said, thanks. And Jesus looks at him and says, and the guy was a foreigner, right? okay, that came back and said thanks. But Jesus says, okay, here's the one. Where are the other 9? There's a problem that most people don't express gratitude. And you can look, Romans chapter 1 tells us part of the problem with a pagan world is they do not honor God and they do not give thanks. It's super important, brother, that we give thanks. We talked about it in our Philippians study this last week. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. So thanksgiving is super foundational for us to be in the right place. This is a hard shift here, so instead I'm going to run 2 different thoughts. Be thankful. I'm going to run foundations are also super important. Psalm 11:3 is kind of interesting, depending on what version you read, the way this comes out. I'm going to put it tonight as if this is a true statement. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? Foundations are important. Okay, you guys remember in Zechariah chapter 4, who was going to lay the foundations of the temple when they were rebuilding it? Anybody remember who was going to lay the foundation of that temple and who was going to finish it? Whose hands? Mr. Ashley, I know you've been reading through this recently. Yeah. Zerubbabel with the signet ring, okay? And in that context, he said, your hand's going to lay the foundation of this, and your hands are going to finish it. And in that context, he says, who has despised the day of small things? Foundations are super important. And when we, as we're moving on and being grateful, I think it's really important that we remember the past. Okay? We have so much to be thankful for, and a lot of that gratitude needs to be, we need to think about what people have done in the past for us to be able to walk into this today. You guys remember George Santayana said, if we don't learn from history, we are doomed to repeat it, right? Condemned to repeat it. So these foundations really are important. I should say one other thing. I think the first part of gratitude is to notice. These guys get healed. They recognize they get healed. The first part is to notice and then to think about it, to meditate, to consider. Okay, and that guy comes back. My dad did set the stage. We grew up in our family for a number of years on Thanksgiving Day. I don't remember the order, but I think it was before we ate. We would go and we would watch a documentary called The Harvest of Despair. And what The Harvest of Despair was about was the systematic starvation by Stalin of the Ukraine, okay, where I think 7 million people died in that. And what my dad was communicating is, guys, we have a lot to be thankful for. Okay? And sometimes to contrast it with what it could be. And so to think, to remember the past, to recognize it, and to then build for the future. I want to turn to Psalm 71, actually. There's a fleshly tendency of mankind to, the words of Proverbs, a leech has 2 daughters. Anybody remember Leech's 2 daughters' names? Give. Okay? There is a natural tendency of the fleshly tendency of human beings to take, to want other people to give, but not be willing to ourselves. I think, Sue, when you filled in on an adult Bible school class, you did a class about Manasseh, right? It was actually very interesting because Manasseh may have been the worst king in history of Judah. And he had a long reign, 52 years, I think 52 years was his reign. He did turn, though, at the end, okay, which is really amazing. But anybody remember Manasseh was whose son? Hezekiah. Hezekiah was one of, arguably, the greatest king of Judah following King David. Did all of these reforms, tore down those high places, reinstituted temple worship the way it was supposed to be, Passover, all of those things. Hezekiah did amazingly well. But there's one huge problem with Hezekiah. And it showed up when people from Babylon came and he showed them everything. And then the word came, hey, these guys are going to basically steal all this stuff, destroy it, and in the future. And what was his response? Anybody remember? Gary? As long as it doesn't happen in my days. Okay? A really righteous man who forgot something, lost sight of something really important. We got to always be thinking of the future. And so a part of gratitude is building for the future. Psalm 71. Verse, what do I have here? 17 through 19. O God, you have taught me from my youth, and I still declare your wondrous deeds. And even when I am old and gray, O God, do not forsake me until I declare your strength to this generation, the power to all who are to come. For your righteousness, O God, reaches to the heavens. You have done great things, O God, who is like you. Very thankful to God for his righteousness, who is like God. But in the middle of this, he says, please be with me until I declare this to the generation to come. And so I think it's really important, brother, that we all understand our past, where we came from, the price that was paid, and think about what are we willing to pay today. Not just to be takers, but to be givers. To be willing to pay that same price. I better hurry. 2 Corinthians 10, verse 5. We're destroying speculations, every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God. The first century church had to take on a bunch of things. Jewish legalism, the book of Galatians. Pagan idolatry, the nations around those Gentiles, idolatry and immorality, just intertwined like this. It was a huge battle that the church, pulling Gentiles into Christianity to get them to turn away from those two things because it was so much a part of their lives. And then Greek philosophy also, which the wanting to sound smart and talk about everything and never get any real answers is the way I'm going to say that. All right? So, but eventually the church did raise the triumph standard of Christ over the battlefield of the mind. It's kind of interesting, actually. In this passage, 2 Corinthians 10, we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ, right? And that starts with our thoughts, but I think the context is really, we're talking about taking other people's thoughts captive in obedience to Christ. Okay? So it starts with ours, but then as we're going out there and we're doing this, helping other people take their thoughts. But it's interesting, the work of the twisting serpent. Satan is very crafty. And so the Catholic clergy adopted the trappings of the Jewish priesthood. So let's just put it this way. Early church will say, approximately, when was Revelation written? Last book of the Bible. Yeah, we'll say 90, 95. I'll say 95 AD. Okay? So Gnosticism had already set in, and you already had an attack on the church structure. Okay? But when would we say full-blown Catholicism, roughly? When you think of the Catholic Church, don't look at their history. They'll go, okay? But when would you say Catholicism really gained a foothold? When you think of the Catholic Church, anybody have a date? Yeah, I'm thinking 300 is kind of where I would settle, somewhere in there. By 300 AD, you had full-blown Catholicism, and the clergy had adopted the trappings of the Jewish priesthood, which is what the early church had to take on, Jewish legalism. The Catholic theologians had borrowed from the Greek philosophers. That was one of the battles. And the statues of the saints and Jesus were substituted for Mercury and Jupiter. The icons, if you will, the idolatry. So all of these things were there. And that spiritual blackness then plunged Europe into the Dark Ages. I think historians would probably have a different ranges on what they call the Dark Ages. I'm going to say approximately 500 to 1500. A dark time. the ability for people to actually gain knowledge on their own apart from somebody feeding them what they wanted them to know. Okay? A period of darkness. Yes, Mr. Hoffman.
That's also called the golden age of the church in Catholicism.
Okay, so Mr. Hoffman said that's also called the golden age of the church in Catholicism. So that tells you something, doesn't it? Okay, and I'm not going to just pick on the Catholics tonight, but one thing we're going to see with Catholicism is they do not want people. They never wanted people to read the Bible. They wanted you to only know what they gave. And you think about it, we call it the Holy Roman Empire. The government and the Catholic Church were like this. Okay? And so people were really oppressed by, I'll just say, lack of information. So the Catholic Church calls it the Golden Age. Here's the Dark Ages. Matthew, you had something?
We put a lot of emphasis on, God's Word accomplishing its purpose and the sifting and sorting and like finding the lost souls. So I asked my grandpa Jay, why weren't there any like really true Christians at this time? How does that happen? And his answer was, there just wasn't really any truth seekers on the face of the earth at the time. And you do see how, cultures, society, religious freedom does affect even the number of truth seekers existing at a time, and we're starting to see that more in today's world. So many distractions. You can think about everything but the truth. Yes. And really just, drown yourself out in the noise.
What is truth? So you're right, there is a society, and societally, we are going back down that path to destroy truths, even a desire in people's minds to seek truth. And so, yeah, it is something we need to be aware of. And the Catholicism, guys, if you think about it, one of the things they were masters at is the technical word. I remember my dad preached a great message at family camp a number of years back on this called syncretism. Okay? And syncretism means a mix of. Mix of Christianity with whatever paganism is around. We got to be careful because Satan he's a master at that. And in our time, sometimes I think what a huge disconnect between people who claim to be Christians and their behavior. Have you guys noticed that? It's like sometimes people tell me, oh yeah, once they find, oh, I'm a Christian too, and I would have had I couldn't have guessed it. Because there's a total disconnect between behavior and, well, it's just a mix of worldliness with so-called Christianity. And I don't have time to get into this, but if you follow the fall of Israel, one of the problems with Israel when they went into captivity, then the 2 Kings 17 talks about this. They worshiped Yahweh along with all these other gods. So it wasn't true worship of Yahweh, it was a mix. And that never counts. Sue's been talking a little bit about the high places. The same concept. They're going up and they might be worshiping Yahweh at the high place, but when you don't worship God in accordance with the way he said, you're not really worshiping God. Okay? Anyways, I could go on that. I'm not going to. So the seeds of revolution here started in Germany. Johannes Gutenberg, developing printing using movable type and red ink, man's greatest invention. This is an amazing thing. How many of you guys got your smartphones on you? You could pull that thing out and you could say, this thing starts way back here. Okay? It really an awesome invention where now there's a means of disseminating information, okay, to people on a mass scale. Obviously, we've come a long way since then. Okay? I mean, they're having to do every block letter. Okay? But it was still huge in terms of what they were able to do over handwritten copies. So there's this opportunity for this to get out. So the increasing light with that information was to push back the curtain of the Dark Ages, and the product was Western civilization. At the same time, so that's around 1450. At the same time, you have the fall of Constantinople. So this, anybody remember the original name for Constantinople? Okay, Byzantium, right? And then you had the Emperor Constantine come, and of course the name gets changed to Constantinople. And today I think it's Istanbul, right? So, but it fell in 1453 to the Ottoman Turks, the Muslims there. But what's interesting, the scholars brought copies of the scrolls of the New Testament, which formed the Byzantine stream of manuscripts for the translation of the New Testament into modern languages. So you think about all of the modern versions, like New King James, New American Standard, ESV, those are using both the Byzantine stream and the Alexandrian texts. But the Alexandrian texts weren't, even by the time King James, they hadn't been discovered yet. Okay, so this is the stream of manuscripts by which the rest of these things came into place. So publication of Greek New Testament, Erasmus, the Dutch humanist, and that word humanist is different than when we think of humanists today, we think of people that are elevating humans above as the God, right? Or as gods. Okay? What this more meant for the good of humanity. Okay? And Erasmus' goal actually was that everyone be able to read the Bible from the farmer in the field to the weaver at the loom. I like that. That was his aim. And so he published Greek New Testament in 1516. This was going to be a basis, guys. What sometimes you hear it, the Textus Receptus. This is the basis by which a bunch of the other translations of the Bible, they go back to Erasmus' Greek New Testament. So he actually did. Not only did he do a Greek New Testament, but he published a more accurate version of the Latin as well. Up till this point in time, it's the Latin Vulgate. Jerome, way back in 400. The common language of the Latin people, but from 400 up to 1500, he did a modernized, more accurate version in the Latin as well. Okay, but the stage was set then for the translation and distribution of the Bible in the language of the common man. The price was high. I already mentioned this a little bit, but I'm going to highlight it. The price was high. I do want us to think about this, because it doesn't matter any organization, any society, any family, the Lord's church. If there ever is a tipping point where there's more takers than givers, it won't work. It's doomed for failure. I think it was Benjamin Franklin who said, when the people find that they can vote themselves money, that will herald the end of the republic. And we see that happening. You guys notice even the election? All the rural areas, it's all red, isn't it? It's the urban centers that are, what is that? People are finding they can vote themselves money. And so it's that mentality of taking rather than giving. And so we want to make sure that we understand and are willing to pay the price. I want us to think about this, okay? This is motivating to me personally. So on mainland Europe and the island of Great Britain, men and women suffered greatly for their faiths. The heritage of liberty is derived from their blood, their bones, and their ashes. This is nothing new. Anybody remember? Let's go to Revelation chapter 12. In this great spiritual war, we'll simplify this that there's two groups of people: overcomers and those who are overcome. Okay? If you're overcome, you lose. Okay? If you're an overcomer, you're a victor. And we want to be those who are overcomers. But Revelation 12, verse 11, it says they overcame him. They overcame Satan because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony. That's really the testimony of Jesus. It's talking about there. And they did not love their life even to death. This is what it takes to overcome. You think about the first century when people confessed Jesus as Lord. I think my dad mentioned it on Lord's Day morning. They were very possibly signing their death warrant, and they knew that. We've lived in a time of tremendous freedom freedom of speech. We can confess Jesus as Lord without fear of persecution. But let me ask you guys a question. Does the Lord ask any less commitment from us today? That confession that Jesus is Lord is the same commitment required. And so we want to be willing to pay the price. And if our blood needs to flow, is the Lord worthy of that? And so I'm preaching a little bit to the choir because you guys are all here on Wednesday night, the night before Thanksgiving. But, I just think about it in my life sometimes. Okay, Luke, what the excuses, the reasons that I can come up with to not give of myself more. It's like, wait a second. I am somebody. I don't know if you guys think this way, but when I said from the time I was a kid, it burned in me. Give me liberty or give me death. I picture myself. I'm willing to say that for the cause of Christ. I think we all are here because we're willing to say that. But we have to be very real about that. That shows up in our day-to-day life, doesn't it? We put Christ first, day in, day out, or we don't. And so I like to think about it in terms of the blood. Like, yeah, I'd be willing to die. Well, then, if I am, then I'm willing to live. So here's a decree from it's the Chronicles of Anabaptist Suffering. So these were the guys that figured out, hey, kids got no business being baptized. Children, infants, they don't know what they're doing. Okay? So this should be for people who can make their own decision. Now, they still were wrong. They're sprinkling or more pouring. Okay? So they still were wrong. But they took on the Catholicism here, and there was a decree in the Netherlands, 1531, against all those who were opposed to the Roman profession, who were all threatened with cruel punishments of death. By virtue of this decree, all who believed otherwise in the Roman Church, or who had such books in their possession, or harbored such heretics or people, and all those whom the magistrates were commanded to apprehend, were strictly sentenced to death. Men were burned at the stake, and women were buried alive. So, being burned at the stake, picture yourself there, and they put all the wood around you and light that wood on fire and till you burn enough to die. Okay. Women buried alive, okay. It's a tough way to go. Okay. But these people would not back down. Okay. And I appreciate that a lot. Part of this decree, none might have in his possession, buy, give, carry, read, or communicate the doctrines, writings, or books of the Lutherans, Zwinglians, etc., or dispute about them. So in other words, you're not allowed to have conversations about this stuff. Neither might they confer or dispute with anyone about the Holy Scriptures or read the same to others, except Romish theologians or doctors of divinity or those who are properly licensed. In other words, you can't have conversations with others about the Bible without an expert there. Honestly, there's still groups today that do that. In the Philippines, there's a group called Iglesia Ni Cristo. Julie and I have it's the second, I think it's the second most popular religion over there behind Catholicism. But they aren't allowed to have a conversation with you about the Bible without one of their upper people with them. Did anybody know who else is like that here in the U.S.? Any group that kind of rings a bell for you? Yeah, Mormons, they'll bring somebody in pretty soon, won't they? Okay? How about Jehovah's Witnesses? Okay, they're not allowed to read the other stuff than the Watchtower. They're not. So, this isn't completely uncommon, is what I'm saying. Guys, truth is never afraid. Truth is never afraid of examination. And so I appreciate that about us as individuals in this congregation. And it's the only way you're ever going to get to truth is when the free flow of information and ideas is allowed. Okay? This is one of my heroes, personally, William Tyndale. Okay? Translated the New Testament into English in the mid-1520s. As a matter of fact, while I was propped up here for a few days, I went back and watched the 1980s movie God's Outlaw. Wow, I forgot how blurry movies are from the 1980s. But, and slow-paced, very slow-paced. But this guy's really one of my heroes. Okay, he had a conversation with a local friar following a heated debate, and those Roman Catholic friars exclaimed, "We'd be better off without God's law than the law of the Pope." You see what he's saying? He's elevating the Pope's authority over the authority of the Scriptures. Honestly, if you get in conversation, in Bible study with an entrenched Catholic, that's actually where they stand. The authority of the Pope is greater than the authority of the Scripture, which doesn't make any sense. But I like what William Tyndale said. He said, "I defy the Pope and all his laws. If God spare my life, ere many years, I will cause a boy that drives the plow to know more of the Scriptures than you do." So his picture is, I want the Bible in the hands of every Englishman. The boy that's behind the plow having a Bible that he can pull out and read and study and know. And so he wasn't able to get anybody to publish, to print any of that, his translation. So he actually would get them printed in Germany and then smuggle them back into England. Okay, he went to great lengths to do that. And then when they were found, they were ordered, seized, and burned. And then he ended up being tried for heresy, condemned. They strangled him first and then burned him at the stake. Some weird stuff that they did. I don't know. I assume he was dead from the strangling. Okay, there's a little bit of different there. But point is, this guy's willing to take it on. And this happened in 1536. Okay, and so I want you to listen to this for a second. He was burned at the stake in 1536. His last words were, "Lord, open the eyes of the king that he may see." Within 3 years, the king endorsed Coverdale's Bible, which Coverdale had basically just taken Tyndale's work. And at the very end of the Coverdale Bible, he actually inscribed in the back as WT for William Tyndale. So a few years later, and then less than 100 years, 70 years later, the King James Version of the Bible that's endorsed. Some of us watched that movie, which is really interesting. But point is, these guys were willing to pay the price for this to be in the hands of the people. All of this is leading up to what got the Pilgrims to come this way. So the Reformers in England, Henry VIII severed the Church of England from Roman Catholics in 1534. They wouldn't give him permission to divorce his wife. Okay, so that's why he started the Church of England. Interesting. So Mary Tudor acceded to the throne in 1553. She's known as Bloody Mary because of her persecution of the Protestants. The Protestant voice got, okay. Elizabeth I became queen in 1558. She didn't really care that much. So there was more freedom. She was more economic push. So the Reformers came back with a vision of a purified church, one that returned to primitive Christianity of the first century. So you think about Reformers, and then you get these guys that want a purified church. That's where you get the term Puritans from, okay? And the Puritans, some of them became convinced that no real reformation would occur within the Church of England. Pretty smart, okay? They were never going to overthrow and reform that church that the king is in control of. And so Robert Brown founded the first separatist church, Norwich, England, 1581. And this movement produced such leaders as John Smith, John Robinson, William Brewster, and William Bradford. Those last two names you guys might recognize. Okay? William Brewster and William Bradford, big names in what we think of as the Pilgrims. Okay? So they left for England in 1608 for the Netherlands. They basically decided we're going to sail for this new world. So they head back to England, I think in, what was the Mayflower's buddy? Speedwell. Okay, I think they took the Speedwell back. And then we're going to try to get both of them over, and the Speedwell kept having problems, so they ended up on the Mayflower. And this is really cool. So November 11th, 1619, before the Mayflower landed, they drafted the Mayflower Compact, okay, which is really, really instrumental. We are huge beneficiaries of that in terms of freedom. Bob, can you get ready and pull that up? We did, the last couple years here, we did drive through history. I would have loved to do it again because I'm a little rough shape, but I figured 3 years in a row is a little much. So, but there is a 9-minute clip that's a quick overview of the Pilgrims that they can do better than I can. So if you're able, Bob, to pull that up, I'll make my way down here for a second.
But to truly appreciate the early tradition of Thanksgiving Day in America, we need to go back to the start of it all, Plymouth, Massachusetts, and the arrival of the Pilgrims. This is Plymouth Rock at Pilgrim Memorial State Park in Plymouth, Massachusetts. This park was created in 1920 to celebrate the 300th anniversary of the Pilgrims landing here. Traditionally, this unassuming rock marks the spot where the Christian story of North America first began. While the first known reference to this rock dates to 1715, it's had quite a history of being the Plymouth Rock. In 1774, the rock was actually broken in half during an attempt to move it to the Plymouth Town Square. The top portion was then moved to the Pilgrim Hall Museum in 1834, and then returned here to its original site in 1880. Plymouth Rock was originally about 20,000 pounds, but now you see a version that's been broken, sawed, and chipped over the years by historians and treasure hunters alike. The Pilgrims intended to land in Virginia, but the Mayflower was blown off course here to Massachusetts. With the weather too dangerous to keep sailing, the captain insisted they make landfall. One of their leaders, William Bradford, wrote this: "Being thus arrived in a good harbor and brought safe to land, they fell upon their knees and blessed the God of heaven, who had brought them over the vast and furious ocean and delivered them from all the perils and miseries thereof. Last and not least, they cherished a great hope and inward zeal of laying good foundations for the propagation and advance of the gospel of the kingdom of Christ in the remote parts of the world." "200 years later, at the bicentennial celebration of the landing of the Pilgrims at Plymouth Rock, Secretary of State Daniel Webster said, 'There is a sort of genius of the place which awes us. We feel that we are on the spot where the first scene of our history was laid, where the hearths and altars of New England were first placed, where Christianity and civilization made their first lodgment in a vast extent of country. Let us not forget the religious character of our origin. Our fathers were brought hither by their high veneration for the Christian religion. They journeyed by its light and labored in its hope. They sought to incorporate its principles within the elements of their society and to diffuse its influence through all their institutions, civil, political, or literary." The Pilgrim Memorial State Park is the perfect spot for one of those coin-operated binocular machines. Just drop in a coin and clean off the germs. Okay, I'm a little more thorough than most, and take in the local natural beauty.
Viewing time has been exceeded.
Pro tip, kids, clean off the machine then add the coins. This painting, The Embarkation of the Pilgrims, still hangs in the U.S. Capitol Rotunda in Washington, D.C. It proudly and prominently depicts the first pilgrims kneeling in prayer to God. This is Plymouth Plantation. It's a living museum created in 1947, which attempts to reproduce the original settlement established by the Pilgrims here in the 1620s. With no king-appointed person on board the Mayflower with authority to take charge of Plymouth Colony, the Pilgrims gave themselves authority and created their own government. They wrote the Mayflower Compact. We whose names are underwritten, having undertaken for the glory of God and advancement of the Christian faith and the honor of our king and country, a voyage to plant the first colony in the northern parts of Virginia, do by these presents solemnly and mutually in the presence of God and one another, covenant and combine ourselves together into a civil body politic. Contrary to what our history books might tell us today, Puritan Christians came to the New World with a distinctly Christian vision for the glory of God and the advancement of the Christian faith. Once the Pilgrims agreed on their community structure, the hard work of running the colony began. Sadly, the Pilgrims were very unprepared for their first harsh winter in the New World. More than half of them died of exposure and starvation before spring of 1621. By the following winter, an English-speaking Indian named Squanto befriended the Pilgrims and taught them how to build durable homes and grow maize. Governor William Bradford wrote that Squanto was, quote, a special instrument sent by God for their good beyond their expectations. In the late fall of 1622, the Pilgrims, Squanto, Chief Massasoit, and the Wampanoag people feasted on maize and wild game, giving thanks to God. Many historians consider this gathering the first Thanksgiving on American soil. In addition to Plymouth Rock, Pilgrim Memorial State Park is home to another powerful memorial, the National Monument to the Forefathers. Formerly known as the Pilgrim Monument, this statue honors the Mayflower Pilgrims. Dedicated in 1889, this is said to be the world's largest solid granite monument. On the main pedestal of this 81-foot monument stands the heroic figure Faith, with her right hand pointed toward heaven and her left hand clutching the Bible. 4 figures are seated around her, which represent the principles on which the Pilgrims founded their commonwealth: morality, law, education, and liberty. Each was carved from a solid block of granite. The right and left panels contain the names of those who traveled on the Mayflower. Now, the rear panel back here contains a quote from Governor William Bradford. Thus, out of small beginnings, greater things have been produced by his hand that made all things of nothing and gives being to all things that are. And as one small candle may light 1,000, so the light here kindled hath shone unto many, yea, in some sort to our whole nation. Let the glorious name of Jehovah have all the praise. There you go. The story of the Mayflower Pilgrims and their impact on Thanksgiving in early America.
Okay, I think I won. I won't finish the rest of this. I'll just mention the Mayflower Compact, guys, is a huge thing. Okay. Prior to this, so if you think about the English monarchy, for example, and basically throughout history, it's been the king is the law. And there's a huge shift here, okay, with written constitution. The law is king. And a beautiful thing, God had this laid in from the very beginning. You even think about the 10 Commandments, etc. God had the idea of a written law. And even God himself, he won't break his own law. The scriptures cannot be broken. And so a huge component of freedom is that the law is king. It holds people in government under the authority of something greater than themselves instead of them able to have make arbitrary decisions. And this country is really moving away from that. The Constitution is not outdated. It's that we've forgot to learn from history. And people aren't willing to pay that same price. So I hope we can appreciate it. We got so much to be thankful for. I don't necessarily encourage you to watch The Harvest of Despair tomorrow, but be thankful. Be thankful for what we have and apply this spiritually. Let's be willing to, for the next generation, to leave this better than we found it. To be willing to pay the price of liberty. Was it Jefferson who said the price of liberty is eternal vigilance? You've got to be willing to pay the same price. And so appreciate you guys bearing with me tonight, and hope this was encouragement and a reminder. Let's be thankful. All the time, but particularly we got a lot to be thankful for this weekend.